clothes. In high school, I always loved it, and I always, kind of tried to...
Under the molten lights of Milan's runways, a young woman with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of winter storms stepped into fashion history. Maggie Rizer wasn't just walking for Versace, she was gliding into the pages of every magazine that mattered, a living embodiment of late 90s glamour. She became the face of Gucci, a darling of Vogue, a muse whispered about in the corridors of power. And then she vanished. No farewell walk, no scandals splashed across glossy covers, just a sudden, aching absence. A name that once dominated fashion, now spoken only in past tense. What could erase a supermodel at her peak? Was it a secret she couldn't outrun? A betrayal she couldn't survive? Or simply the industry's ruthless appetite for the next face? This is the untold story of Maggie Rizer, the girl the world couldn't stop watching until it did. Maggie Rizer was born in Staten Island, New York in 1978, a world away from the marble floors and champagne flutes of the fashion capitals she would one day command. Her childhood was painted in contrasts, the warmth of a close-knit family and the shadow of a truth rarely spoken in the early 80s. When Maggie was just 14 months old, her parents separated. Her father, Kevin, would later pass away from complications related to AIDS, a loss she would bravely acknowledge in an era when the disease was steeped in stigma. Her mother, Maureen, became the anchor in turbulent seas, raising Maggie and her younger half-siblings with quiet determination. Maggie's beauty was not something she flaunted as a teenager. She was shy, more likely to be found at a friend's kitchen table than in front of a camera lens. But fate, or perhaps fashion's uncanny radar for rare beauty, intervened. A family friend, struck by her delicate bone structure and piercing blue eyes, suggested she try modeling. At first, Maggie dismissed the idea. She wasn't chasing spotlights. But when a small test shoot turned into a portfolio, and that portfolio found its way into the hands of a New York agent, her life began to shift. It was an unassuming start, no dramatic runway debut, just a quiet entry into an industry that would one day consume her entirely. By the late 1990s, the quiet girl from Staten Island had transformed into one of the most sought-after faces in fashion. Maggie Rizer's rise wasn't a slow climb, it was a detonation. One season, she was a promising newcomer. The next, she was everywhere. Her debut on the international runway was met with murmurs from front row editors. Who is that girl? Her luminous skin, Nordic princess hair, and eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light made her impossible to forget. The real turning point came when Steven Meisel, the photographer who could anoint careers with a single frame, cast her for an American Vogue cover in 1999. Draped in couture, Maggie exuded both fragility and strength, a combination that Meisel and other tastemakers found intoxicating. Soon, her portfolio became a roll call of the industry's elite. Mario Testino, Annie Leibovitz, Peter Lindbergh, Versace, Gucci, Prada, the holy trinity of late 90s glamour all wanted her. She walked for Tom Ford during Gucci's sex-charged renaissance, her icy elegance providing a counterpoint to the label's smoldering edge. Donatella Versace sent her down the runway in liquid gold gowns, calling her the face of a generation. Campaigns rolled in: Tommy Hilfiger, Yves Saint Laurent, Calvin Klein. Her image loomed over Times Square and stared back from glossy magazine racks in every airport lounge. What set Maggie apart wasn't just beauty, it was adaptability. She could be the ethereal angel for Valentino one week, then pivot to edgy minimalism for Helmut Lang the next. Her bone structure became legend. Makeup artists joked her cheekbones could cut glass. Comparisons to other supermodels of the time were inevitable. Naomi Campbell had the fire, Kate Moss the rebellion, Claudia Schiffer the bombshell allure. Maggie was the ice queen, untouchable yet hypnotic. In a sea of personalities vying for attention, she drew eyes without forcing them, her presence more magnetic than loud. But fashion's love is as fickle as it is fierce. Even at the height of her career, the clock was ticking. Maggie was booking more than 50 shows a season, flying across continents without pause. Backstage, she was polite, professional, and almost unnervingly calm, a stark contrast to the chaotic whirl of supermodel culture. To those watching, it seemed she was perfectly balanced atop the world. In reality, the higher she climbed, the more fragile the scaffolding beneath her became. She had no reason to suspect that the greatest threat to her future wasn't an industry obsessed with youth, but someone much closer to home. When the storm finally passed, Maggie Rizer emerged into a world that had almost forgotten her. The catwalks were now ruled by a new generation. Gisele Bündchen's effortless confidence, Daria Werbowie's cool minimalism, Karolina Kyrkova's sunny glamour. The industry had moved on at lightning speed, and Maggie's name had faded from the conversation. But she wasn't finished. In the mid-2000s, Maggie began reappearing quietly in select campaigns and runway shows. There was no grand media announcement, no dramatic comeback headline. Just the slow, deliberate steps of someone reclaiming a part of herself. Oscar de la Renta invited her to walk his runway again. She appeared in ad campaigns for Louis Vuitton and Dooney & Bourke, a nod to the fact that her beauty had not aged out of relevance. Still, the spotlight felt different now. For Maggie, modeling was no longer the all-consuming center of her life. It was one part of a broader, more intentional existence. She married businessman Alex Moran in 2010, settling in California and starting a family. Motherhood became her anchor. Photos from this period show her smiling easily, the polished veneer of the runway replaced by a warmth that felt entirely her own. She also began using her platform for causes close to her heart, especially HIV/AIDS awareness, a tribute to the father she lost far too soon. There were appearances at charity galas, interviews reflecting on her career, and moments of candid honesty about the dangers of blind trust and misplaced faith in the wrong people. What defined this chapter wasn't a full return to superstardom, but a quiet dignity. Maggie chose not to chase the frenzied relevance of the fashion cycle. She had learned painfully that fame could vanish in an instant and that its return was never guaranteed. Instead, she focused on building a life that couldn't be stolen: family, purpose, and self-respect. In the eyes of the industry, she might have been a nostalgic figure, a name from the golden age of the late 1990s. But in her own eyes, she was something far more valuable, a survivor who refused to let her story end at the moment of her fall. But behind the glossy covers and the perfect lighting, something darker was gathering. Not in the fashion houses of Paris or Milan, but inside Maggie Rizer's own home. In the early 2000s, as her career was still glowing, Maggie's mother remarried. Her new stepfather, John Breen, entered the picture with charm and promises. He became part of the family's inner circle, someone Maggie trusted implicitly. What she couldn't see then, what no one in the family could, was that he carried a secret addiction that would shatter everything she had built. Breen was an alcoholic, and his dependency came with a dangerous appetite for money. Over the years, while Maggie was traveling from runway to runway, shooting in exotic locations and cashing checks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, Breen quietly took control of her finances. Through a web of lies and manipulated trust, he siphoned away her earnings, Millions of dollars painstakingly earned from campaigns, covers, and catwalks. By the time Maggie realized the truth, it was gone. All of it. The betrayal was more than financial. This wasn't a business deal gone wrong or an investment that soured. This was family. The very people she thought she could rely on, dismantling her future while smiling across the dinner table. Breen's actions were later revealed in court, but no ruling could undo the years of trust destroyed. The loss hit Maggie in waves. First came the practical shock: bills unpaid, obligations unmet, assets liquidated. Then came the deeper wound, the humiliation of having her private devastation become a matter of public record. Fashion is an industry that thrives on the image of perfection. A supermodel in financial ruin was a narrative few wanted to acknowledge. Her bookings began to slow. Not because she lost her beauty or her talent, but because in the ruthless world of fashion, absence breeds replacement. The newer, younger faces were already lined up, ready to claim the spotlight. Maggie's silence about her situation only fueled speculation. Was she simply stepping back? Had she lost her passion? Few guessed the truth, that she was fighting to hold together the pieces of a life that had been gutted from the inside. Interviews from later years hinted at the toll. She described feeling blindsided and stripped of the security she thought she had earned. The betrayal seemed to drain the joy out of modeling, and without that joy, the work became hollow. Soon, she was appearing less on magazine covers, fewer times on the runway, until finally, she was gone from the circuit entirely. The fashion world moved on, as it always does, without so much as a backward glance. For an industry that once couldn't get enough of her face, her absence was treated like an unremarkable season change. Here one year, gone the next. What remained was a kind of ghost story, the golden girl who disappeared. For fans and editors who remembered her at her peak, the silence was deafening. For Maggie, it was survival. Maggie Rizer's story is not simply one of beauty lost to time. It's a reminder of how fragile even the brightest careers can be when built on trust in the wrong hands. She was the embodiment of a fleeting era, the last wave of supermodels who could become household names overnight, whose faces defined the pages of Vogue, whose walks could change the mood of a runway season. Her disappearance from the industry left a gap for those who had admired her, not just for her looks, but for the almost mythic quality she carried. In the collective memory of fashion, she remains the platinum muse who vanished without warning, her story whispered like an unsolved riddle. For younger models, Maggie's journey stands as both inspiration and cautionary tale. The heights are dazzling, but the falls can be silent, and not all wounds are visible in photographs. Today, her legacy is twofold. In fashion, she is still remembered in archives and mood boards. Her Versace gold gowns, her ethereal Gucci looks, her icy blue gaze immortalized in Maisel's photographs. Beyond fashion, she represents resilience, the choice to step away from the chaos and build a life defined on her own terms. She didn't just survive the end of her moment, she rewrote what the end could mean. And in doing so, she left behind something far more enduring than fame, the rare grace of disappearing with dignity.